Today we continue to listen Silavanta Sutta. In this sutta, Venerable Makutika asked Venerable Saripudra, Silavata uso Saripudra Bhikkhuna Gatame Dhamma Yoniso Manasika Dabba. What are the things that a virtuous bhikkhu should carefully attend to? Carefully attend to means what are the Dhamma that a virtuous bhikkhu should wisely attend to? What are the Dhamma that a virtuous bhikkhu should correctly attend to or pay correct attention to? And Venerable Sariputra answer, Silavata uso kutika bhikkhuna. Pinju padane khanda aniccato dukkhato rogato ghandato sanlato agato abadato parato palogato sunyato anattato yoniso manasikatapa. That means, friend Kustika, a virtuous bhikkhu should carefully attend to the 5 aggregates subject to clinging. Upadanekanda is impermanent. A virtuous bhikkhu should carefully attend to the 5 aggregates subject to clinging as suffering, as a disease, as empty, as chuma, as dat, as misery, as affliction, as alien, as dissolution, as non-self. So a Venerable Sariputta has said that a virtuous bhikkhu, Silawa, or an instructed bhikkhu, Suttawa, should attend to the 5 aggregates subject to clinging as impermanent, as suffering, and so on. So the reference to an Suttawa, instructed bhikkhu, raised a question. How much knowledge does a person need before he can practice meditation? If you study Visuddhimagga, you may find that you have to know a lot before you practice vipassana meditation. Visuddhimagga is written by Venerable Bodhisattva, a scholarly monk. As it was written for meditating monks, it was taken for granted that the readers would understand many of the teaching. But for those who are not initiated into the teaching of the Buddha, the book, which is divided into 3 parts, It is not easy to read. The subject of the first division of Visuddhimagga is how to purify your sila, morality. The second is on concentration samadhi, and explain the 40 subject of samatha meditation. How to prepare for meditation, how to find a teacher, and other details of samatha meditation. It also explains the abhinyas, the four kinds of direct knowledge that a yogi gains after attaining the rupa jhana, material jhanas, and arupa jhana, immaterial jhanas. And the third division on understanding, pinya, is actually about vipassana. Venerable Buddhaghosa began this division with detailed information on the aggregates, khanda, bases, ayatana, elements, dhatu, faculties, indriya, dependent origination, paticca samuppada, the Four Noble Truths, Ariya Sitya. Only after that, he described the practice of vipassana meditation. So Visuddhimagga may give you the impression that before you can practice vipassana meditation, you have to be familiar with all the details of the aggregates and very familiar with the teaching of dependent origination, but most of the yogis are not familiar with all these subjects in detail. At one time, Saka, the kings of gods, asked the Buddha, how much knowledge a monk must have in order to practice and reach arahantship? Ita bhikkhuna sabbe, how much knowledge? And Buddha answered, Ida bhikkhuna sabbe dhamma nala abhinive sayati devanamida. Osaka kings of gods, a bhikkhu has heard that all dhamma are not fit to be clung to as nature, permanence, sukha, happiness, and atta self. All things are not fit to be adhered to as permanence, happiness, and self. When a bhikkhu, when a yogi has heard that all things are not fit to be adhered to, he directly knows everything. That, that means that after hearing that all phenomena are unfit to be adhered to, by craving or wrong views, he or she can practice meditation. So a bhikkhu needs to hear only this much, that all dhammas, all things are not to be taken as permanence, all things are not to be taken as happiness, all things are not to be taken as soul or self. If he knows just this much, he can practice meditation. According to this, a person does not have to know much about the teaching of the Buddha in order to practice meditation. And the commentary adds a little more. Commentary says that if you know there are four noble truths, if you know that the first two truths, dukkha sacca and samudaya sacca, the truth of suffering and the truth of the origin of suffering, belongs to the Vitta sacca, rounds of rebirth. And Nirodha sacca and Megha sacca, the truth of cessation and the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. These two leads to release from the rounds of rebirth, that is Vivitta sacca. If you know in this way, if you know, you may practice meditation only on the first two. If you know this much, you have enough knowledge to practice meditation. And in the Four Noble Truths, two are mundane, dukkha sacca and samudaya sacca. The truth of suffering and the truth of the origin of suffering are mundane, and Nirodha and Megha, the truth of cessation of suffering and the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering, these two are supramundane. When practicing vipassana, yogi deal only with the first two, dukkha and samudaya, which are mundane, the truth, the noble truth of suffering and the noble truth of the origin of suffering. Mostly you deal with dukkha sacca. You observe seeing. Whenever you see, you note seeing, seeing, seeing is dukkha sacca, seeing is truth of suffering. You observe hearing. Hearing is dukkha sacca, the truth of suffering. Smelling, smelling is dukkha sacca, the truth of suffering. Tasting is dukkha sacca, truth of suffering. Touching, knowing are dukkha sacca, truth of suffering. Sitting, standing, walking, lying down, rising and falling of the abdomen. They are five aggregates. They are dukkha sacca, truth of suffering. And also you observe the desire or craving, the truth of the origin of suffering. And the third noble truth of cessation of suffering, Nirodha Satya, is to be realized. And the fourth noble truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering arises at the moment of your enlightenment. It is the result of the practice of vipassana meditation. If you know this much, you have enough knowledge to practice vipassana meditation. And what about understanding paticca What about understanding dependent origination? It has been explained in great detail in the Visuddhimagga. In this case, the sub-commentary says that if you know that there is a cause and there are results of the cause, then you know paticca you know dependent origination. Even if you don't know the details of dependent origination, if you know that there are causes and results of those causes, and if you know that they are related as cause and effect, you are said to virtually have knowledge of dependent origination. In brief, dependent origination teaches that the material and mental states in beings always arise dependent on condition. According to this teaching, everything in the world is conditioned. So if you know only that there are conditions and that there are those conditions, by those conditions, it is enough to say that you virtually understand paticca dependent origination. So for those who have no knowledge of the text and commentaries, but who have some ability to think, let us now consider in this way. 2 months after his enlightenment, Buddha gave his first sermon, Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, to the 5 group of disciples. 5 disciples, Venerable Kundinya, Venerable Wapa, Venerable Bhadia, Venerable Mahanama, and Venerable Asaji. 5 disciples. Do you think the 5 disciples already knew about such thing as the Four Noble Truths? They already knew about the aggregates, the bases, or dependent origination? Can you say that the 5 disciples knew Abhidhamma from previous knowledge? Some people might say, or the five disciples of the Buddha had accumulated a lot of paramis, perfection, and many experiences in the past. They were gifted person, they were talented person. So when they had the Buddha's first sermon, Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, all of that information might already have been in them. But we can say that they definitely did not possess any such knowledge. The discoveries of the Buddha were unknown to any other human beings until he gave the five disciples his first sermon at Isipatana Deer Park. So the five disciples who had no prior knowledge of aggregates, dependent origination, and so forth, learned by listening to the Buddha's first sermon. As a result of listening to the Dhamma, all of them became Sotapannas, and a little later, they became Arhants. And let us take just one more example. Venerable Sariputra was not yet a Buddhist when he met the Venerable Asaji. At that time, Venerable Sariputra belonged to this belongs to the teaching of another teacher. And he knew very little about the Buddha's teaching, but impressed by the demeanor of Venerable Asaji, he asked the Venerable Asaji to teach him something of the Dhamma. Venerable Asaji uttered an instructive verse of 4 lines, Ye Dhamma hi Dupabhava Desa hi Tuntatagato Aha, etc. And it is said that after listening to just the first 2 lines of the verse, Venerable Sariputra became a Sotapanna, and not long afterwards, he became a disciple of the Buddha. As Venerable Sariputra was the most gifted person after the Buddha, it was not difficult for him to get this knowledge the moment he received the teaching from the Venerable Asaji. However, we are not so gifted as the 5 disciples of Venerable Sariputra. So we should know something about the teaching of the Buddha, but not very much. If you know that there are 5 aggregates, Rupa, Vedana, Sinya, Sankara, Vijnana, Rupa, Metta, Vedana feeling, Sinya perception, Sankara mental formation, and Vijnana consciousness. 5 aggregates. And if you know that the 5 aggregates are impermanent, 5 aggregates of suffering and non-self. And if you know that there are four noble truths, if you have heard, read, or already know those teachings, I think you can practice vipassana meditation. Knowledge of the aggregates is very good because you can verify your practice with what you already know. When you practice meditation, you experience many things, and sometimes you don't know what they are. But if you have sound knowledge or correct knowledge of all the aggregates, you will know what is happening to you and what you are experiencing. Then you will be like a person who has read a map before going somewhere. When he's there, he knows where he is and where to go. Also, since you are practicing under the guidance of a teacher, I think it is enough if you have just a little bit of information about the teaching of the Buddha. Your teachers can give you enough information about the 5 aggregates, Maya, Metta, Nama and Rupa, and so forth. So it is good for you to practice vipassana meditation even if you have not read the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, even if you do not know Abhidhamma, your teachers will supply you with these kinds of knowledge and whatever else is necessary to know. We are not saying this to discourage you from studying the Buddha teaching. It is very good to study Buddha's teaching. It is good to know what Buddha taught. But if you are bent on practice, we want you to know that it is possible for you to practice right now, even without detailed knowledge of the teaching of the Buddha. But if you want to share your knowledge with other people, if you hope to be a teacher in the future, or if you are a teacher now, then certainly you will need to acquire wide knowledge of the teaching of the Buddha. Now we return to the answer given by the Venerable Sariputra when he said that Silavanta Bhikkhuna, a virtuous bhikkhu and instructed bhikkhu, Suttawa, a practitioner with morality and knowledge, should carefully attend to the 5 aggregates subject to clinging, which are impermanent, suffering, a disease, and non-self. And the commentary said that we should know that we should know three things regarding impermanence. What is it that is impermanence? Nature. We say nature, impermanent, but what is it that we say is impermanent? Nature. And what are the signs or marks of being impermanent? Anicca Lakkhana. We should know the characteristics or marks or signs of impermanence. And what is repeated seeing of impermanence? What is anicca nupassana? What is it that is impermanent? When we say impermanent, what do you mean by that? You already know. Aniccanti khanda pinjakan khanda. Khanda pinjakan. The five aggregates are impermanent, and they are taught by the Buddha as impermanent. Some have yet to see that this is true, but through practice of vipassana meditation, it will eventually be seen. So what is it that is impermanent? The answer is all five aggregates, not just five aggregates of clinging. There is difference between khanda and upadana khanda. Khanda aggregates and upadana khanda aggregates of clinging. When we say aggregates of clinging, we mean only the mundane aggregates. But when we say aggregates, the supramundane aggregates are also included. So both mundane and supramundane aggregates are impermanent. Megacita, path consciousness, belongs to the supramundane aggregates. It also belongs to the consciousness aggregates and to the supramundane level. But Megacita, path consciousness arises and disappears immediately, to be followed by fruition consciousness, which again disappear immediately. So the types of consciousness that are included in the supramundane aggregates are also impermanent. When we speak of impermanence, we mean that everything in the world is impermanent. But in the language of the books, we say the five aggregates instead of everything in the world. Why do we say that the five aggregates are impermanent? What can we see that causes us to say the five aggregates are impermanent, there must be signs or characteristics that point to their impermanence. You all know those characteristics. According to the Visuddhimagga, rise and fall and change are the characteristics of impermanent. First, there is arising, then there is what called change or becoming different or aging. Then there is falling, there is disappearing. Upada, Titi, and Binga. In watching the aggregates, you see that they arise and last for a few brief moments and then disappear. When you see that they constantly arise, change, and disappear, you know from these characteristics, you know these signs that the aggregates are impermanent. And you know that the characteristics of impermanence are rise, fall, and change. Rise, fall, and change, everything new. You can discover life in practical way. Everything is new. Hearing, you note it, and then new hearing, new hearing. You may be familiar with the three stages of existence: arising, staying for a time, staying for a moment, and then disappearing. They are known as these three sub-moments of one thought moment. When you see a state of mind arises, stay for a time, and then disappear, you know that this state is impermanent. This knowing or this seeing that something is impermanent must come from your own experience. That knowing must not come from a book. That knowing must not come from your teacher. That knowledge must come from within yourself. So we should not be satisfied with what we read in Dhamma books or here in Dhamma talks. We must see for yourself. We must see for ourselves. In order to see impermanence, as Venerable Sariputta did, practice is necessary. We need to do something to prove to ourselves that things are really impermanent. So what should we do? It is actually simple. We should contemplate, we should watch things, including the mind. Just watch them, contemplate them, and you cannot fail to see that they arise and disappear. When practicing Vipassana meditation, sometimes you are making notes of your mind. Your mind wanders and you say you note wandering until it's finished. Then you come back to the home object or primary object. So through your own experience, you see for yourself that wandering mind or thinking mind or thoughts is impermanent because it arises, it stays for a very short time, very short moment, and then disappears. The impermanence of the five aggregates, the impermanence of mind and matter, can be seen for yourself through the practice of Vipassana meditation. Having seen the impermanence of things for yourself, there's no need to go by faith or blindly accept the statement of other people regarding the impermanence of the five aggregates. We ourselves will be able to verify that it is true if we practice and if we pay close attention to objects appearing at the present moment. We cannot fail to see impermanence. It is very encouraging when through our own experience we can discover the secret of mind and matter as taught by the Buddha, as discovered by the Buddha. That is what is called Sandaitika. It's an attribute of the Dharma. Sandaitiko. Dharma are to be seen by ourselves. Sandaitiko Bhagavata Dhamma. The Dharma of the Blessed One is well expounded. It is to be realized by ourselves. So Dhamma are to be seen by ourselves and not just heard second hand from another person. And the commentary described the characteristics in another way. Although it means the same things, it said that Hotva Abhavato Anicca. Hotva Abhavato. Non-existence after having been. Is the characteristics of impermanence. So book language is different from every language, everyday language. And sometimes you may be wondering, Hotva after having been, Abhavato non-existence. Non-existent after having been is the characteristics of impermanence. So whatever we want to say should be put in a way that everybody will understand. So to understand easily, disappearing after arising is the characteristics of impermanence. So you must watch, you must contemplate its arising. It disappear or not disappear, you watch. And it's arising, and you see it disappearing. Now you understand impermanence. You hear the sounds, hearing, and the sound disappears. When the sound disappears, hearing consciousness disappears, and eardrum disappear, whole body disappear simultaneously. So you note and you contemplate every arising of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and knowing. So disappearing after arising is the characteristics of impermanence. If you want to know whether a certain state is permanent or impermanent, you must see if it disappears after arising. It is more important to see the disappearing than the arising. That is because if you see only the arising and not the disappearing, you may have the opposite understanding. And you may think is the state is permanent. So it is important to see the disappearing. However, disappearing is preceded by arising. When there is no arising, there can be no disappearing. So the two go together, arising and disappearing. When you see a state arise and disappear, you know that it is impermanent. So you try to observe, you try to note every arising, watch carefully, and you will see arising and disappearing. So disappearing after arising is the characteristics or marks or signs of impermanence. And the third question to be considered is, what is repeated seeing of impermanence? It is described as contemplation of impermanence, anicca nupassana. You already know the word anicca is impermanence. The word anupassana is made up of anu, that means again and again, and pasana, seeing. So anupassana means seeing again and again, repeated seeing or repeated observation. So when anicca nupassana is translated as contemplation, you may think that it means just thinking about impermanence, but that is not really seeing it. We can force ourselves to seem to understand by saying impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. But that is not real understanding of impermanence either. We must be careful not to deceive ourselves with false assumption. Sometimes people say this is impermanent, that is impermanent, and think that they really know impermanence of something, actually what they are doing is just repeating. The real impermanence that we need to see in order to gain vipassana knowledge is the moment-to-moment impermanence, khana anicca, moment-to-moment impermanence. The other kinds of superficial impermanence, piñati anicca, superficial impermanence, piñati anicca, can be understood without meditation. You drop a glass and it breaks, and so you say it is impermanent. You don't need to practice meditation to understand the kinds of impermanence. You just know it. And when somebody dies, and you say, oh, it is impermanent. And that kind of understanding is not called vipassana knowledge. It cannot lead to dispassion towards the five aggregates. So without dispassion towards the five aggregates, there can be no fading away of mental defilements, kilesa, and no attainment of enlightenment. Superficial understanding of impermanence cannot help us to be dispassionate towards the aggregates or disenchanted with our mind and matter. It will not lead to enlightenment. So this kinds of understanding cannot help us, so it is very important to cultivate and gain the deeper understanding of real impermanence, not the superficial impermanence. Anicca is the repeated seeing of impermanence while observing the rise and fall of the aggregates. It is not understanding just by thinking or without observing the five aggregates. If it is real anicca, it must be the seeing of impermanence while you are in the process of watching or observing the rise and fall of the aggregates during vipassana meditation. If you are not practicing vipassana, there can be no anicca. You may have had real experience of anicca during your practice of vipassana. But when you are out of practice, there is no anicca. There can be only the remembrance or memory of anicca. So there are three characteristics of phenomena existence: anicca, impermanence, dukkha, suffering, and anatta, no soul. It is said that even when there is no Buddha in the world, anicca and dukkha, impermanence and suffering can be taught, but nobody except Buddha can teach anatta, non-self. But there is a statement of the Buddha himself in one of the texts which say that when you see one characteristics, when you see anicca, and the other two, dukkha and anatta, suffering and non-self, are also seen. This means that if you see impermanence, if you see a nature, you also see suffering nature and non-self nature. However, it is said that anatta non-self can be taught by Buddhas only. So when there are no Buddhas, can you really get anicca nupassana? Can anicca nupassana be taught? The sub-commentary makes that statement and say that the kinds of impermanence taught when there is no Buddha must just be superficial impermanence, pinyati anicca, not real moment-to-moment impermanence, not kana anicca. Because if you see moment-to-moment impermanence when there is no Buddha, you will also see the non-self nature without the Buddha. So the sub-commentary said that even the impermanence and suffering said to be taught during the time when there is no Buddha must be just superficial nature, superficial impermanence and superficial dukkha, superficial suffering, not real nature and dukkha that we see through vipassana meditation. So it is important to see paramattha anicca, moment to moment anicca, paramattha dukkha, ultimate suffering. And we need to understand the pinyati anicca and pinyati dukkha, superficial impermanence and superficial suffering are not ultimate. So we need to practice vipassana meditation to see paramattha anicca and paramattha dukkha, anatta, moment-to-moment impermanence and moment-to-moment suffering, and then real non-self. So let us practice vipassana meditation for a few minutes.